the guide. And this is a good reminder, we will be recording this event today, just to make sure that those folks who weren't able to join us still have a recording. We'll share this with you as well. So this report is a culmination of several years in the making, bringing together and hearing from many of you who are on this call today. So we're so grateful to all of you who participated in this work and your support. The guide is now live on our website and available for download. And part of today will be going through the guidance at a high level and sharing actionable steps for partnerships with communities and within business areas, and really highlighting where companies can start to advance climate justice. I also want to acknowledge that this guide is standing on the shoulders of giants. Environmental and climate justice organizations and individuals have fought for decades for rights to safe and healthy and survivable environment, and have elevated the need for climate justice at a national scale. And you will see some of those voices shared throughout the guidance. And today, after we provide the overview of the guide, you will hear from two amazing people who have been on the climate justice journey and have been part of this work, and they'll be joining our panel today. And just a quick note, if you do have questions as we go through the content, there's quite a bit of content that we'll be covering today. Please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we have some time available at the end for Q&A. But we'll also try to answer your questions as we go through. So I want to start sharing a little bit of our journey together between Forum for the Future and B-Lab Global and B-Lab in US and Canada. And then I'll share the Forum part, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Kylie to share more from a B-Lab perspective. So Forum began this journey a couple of years ago. We launched a program called American Climate Futures, a national program aiming to ensure the needs and voices of those most impacted by climate change in the US are at the forefront for climate-related solutions. And we conducted a landscape analysis to really identify what is climate justice, who is working in the space, what are some of the key barriers and opportunities for taking action. And we heard from businesses and for community groups, and especially from businesses, we heard that they recognize that centering justice and equity in climate action efforts is critical, but there are significant roadblocks. And some of these included lack of knowledge about where to take action, uncertainty about the process for which to work with communities, and feeling unsure that they might misstep as they go out and engage with communities, and really uncertainty about how to overcome lack of trust due to past and ongoing harms between business and communities. We also knew as we were conducting our research that we did not want to duplicate the work that already exists, and we wanted to collaborate and build on what's already out there, and really partnered with others who were on a similar journey. And so we connected with B-Lab. We formally partnered in June of 2023, so last year, and we share a belief that businesses can be a force for change, and that business has an imperative to address climate justice. And so through this partnership, we have shared research, we've co-hosted events, including Climate Week, which some of you joined us in person. And what was interesting, we found that even though we're conducting our own research and interviews and workshops independently, we came across similar findings, that even though it was across the US, we came across similar findings that we're now sharing with you in this guide. And it is now my pleasure to pass the virtual mic over to Kylie Nielis from B-Lab US and Canada, who has been working with Forum very closely on this project.
Thank you so much, Ksenia. I'm so happy to be here with everyone. Happy Earth Day to you all. It is a beautiful Earth Day here in Oakland, California, and very glad that you could all join us. So I'll just quickly provide an overview of B-Lab Global, B-Lab US and Canada. For those of you who are not familiar with our organizations on the call, I know we do have many B Corps here, which is great. So first, B-Lab Global. B-Lab Global creates standards, policies, tools, and programs to really shift behavior and culture and the structural underpinnings of capitalism. B-Lab Global has now mobilized over 7,000 B Corps in 85 countries across 160 industries, and more than 100,000 companies have used the B-Impact Assessment and the SDG Action Manager to manage their impact. So B-Lab US and Canada, the organization that I work for as Senior Program Manager for Climate Justice, is just one of 6 global partners of this global network. B-Lab US and Canada's role is to foster and mobilize a growing community of B Corps here in the United States specifically, and Canada. Right now, we have over 2,500 and growing certified B Corps in the Canada and US community. So it's been really exciting to see that growth. And a few years ago, B-Lab US and Canada made a market shift and commitment around our 3 impact pillars within our theory of change. So those are climate justice, the work that I do, racial equity, and policy and stakeholder economy. The climate justice work at B-Lab has been happening for some time. In 2018, the B Corp Climate Collective launched. That's the network of B Corps that are committed to taking action on climate while centering justice and equity. And a couple years later, there was a commitment within that group of B Corps at an in-person convening to really go deep on justice and to say we cannot simply do the decarbonization work and the climate action work without also considering the impact of people and communities. So since then, we've had a number of various resources, events, and program opportunities we've launched around climate justice, really in the name of engaging B Corps deeply in this work, and also providing a lot of starting points for those B Corps that are maybe not quite as far along in the journey. But what some of this has looked like over the past few years is first the Climate Justice Playbook for Business, launched in 2021. Very robust resource. If you haven't seen it, we will share the link to it in the follow-up to this workshop, really covering how businesses can align their practices, their models and behavior with climate justice. We've had several community interviews that we've held, and that's actually what led to this partnership with Forum, and a lot of it you'll see present in the guide. So we met with 16 frontline community leaders over a period of about 1.5 years to really dig into what they wanted businesses to do differently and what they wanted them to understand about climate justice, kind of where we've been and where we need to go. We have had Earth Month guides previous to this year's that have centered the insights from those interviews, and then other events and workshops and partnerships like the one with Forum to really build on all of this. So B-Lab US and Canada is very much continuing on this journey and building on a lot of past work, but really excited to be entering this next phase with the launch of the guide. Back to you, Ksenia.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to give you kind of at a high level about the guides. So Kylie mentioned some of the interviews that B-Lab conducted. Collectively, the Forum was conducting interviews. We're conducting workshops, multiple workshops, both in person as well as virtually. And collectively, we talked to about 100 people, both people living and working at the front line of climate change, people working to support and advance climate justice issues through their organizations, and people within the business sphere working to take action on climate justice. And the guidance, you will see throughout the guidance, we try to pull out quotes, and we really try to elevate the voices of those people who we've spoken with to make sure that we're amplifying what we're hearing. The guidance is made up of 3 critical main sections, which we'll be going through. So frontline perspectives, and this is where we're hearing some of the challenges and concerns from frontline communities, as well as vision for the future and what's possible and how they would like to engage with businesses. Partnering with communities, and we both have principles as well as very specific practice areas on how businesses can go about in partnering with communities across your journey. And then finally, business sphere of action, where we go into specifics on different actions that businesses can start taking across their operations, supply chain, policy advocacy. So we'll go through all of this in just a moment and cover some of these sections. And we also want to acknowledge this is a work in progress. We ourselves are on a learning journey. We don't have all the answers, and we're open to hearing from you and encourage all of you to reach out, add your thoughts to the chat as we go through this, or reach out after the events. We are very, very open and would really welcome feedback. So this guide is for a business audience, really those who are already working on sustainability agenda and looking to bring in community voices, and recognizing that climate solutions and sustainabilities really also need to be addressing equity and justice, and that community voices need to be at the center of climate solutions. So also for those who are open to new leadership approach, focusing on regenerative mindset, embracing humility and learning, and addressing that we need to collaborate and partner in order to do this work. And I want to elevate it, this beautiful quote from Tracy Osborne from UC Center for Climate Justice. We need business, but we need business to operate in a very different way, profoundly aligned with the principles of climate justice. This means reimagining markets to not simply limit harm. They must foster healthy communities and ecosystems. It's powerful, and we've heard this from communities that businesses are needed, and sometimes there's a missing voice and a missing link between the work that communities are doing, the work that policymakers are doing, and that business are doing. And so this report hopes to bridge that gap. And finally, thank you to all of you who have contributed. I said we had spoke with about 100 people, and we have all of the different names and organizations here. We're not going to read through all of these, but we deeply appreciate all your support and contributions to this work. Now I'm going to pass it to Kylie to start going into some of the insights of the report.
Thank you, Ksenia. So the sections that I'll share with you all right now begin with the urgent need for justice and really the case for change. So if we can go to the next slide, Christina. Thank you. So one of our aims with the guide was to provide some really solid starting definitions of climate justice, but also knowing that definitions of climate justice vary, and we have a lot of different perspectives and viewpoints on that, and that's okay. So for the sake of this time that we have together, I will read out the definition of climate justice that we use in the guide. And so that's climate justice seeks to address the disproportionate impacts of climate change on underserved communities, including low-income groups, people of color, Black and Indigenous peoples, and those with fewer resources to prepare and recover from climate disasters. It acknowledges historical injustices and systemic inequities that exacerbate vulnerability to climate-related events. It prioritizes the needs of frontline communities, aiming to rectify environmental and social disparities by centering equity in climate action and policymaking, while holding accountable those who bear the most significant responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions. Similarly, we have a definition of frontline communities, naming them as the fewest resources to adapt to climate change and often the least responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, yet many times the most impacted. These communities have a critical expertise and perspective around the needs and also the climate solutions that are best equipped to really make the change that we need in terms of addressing this incredibly scaled crisis. We'll explore these opportunities in the following sections. So we really wanted to start with some key definitions to ground everyone in what we're speaking to. Next slide, please, Christina. Then we leaned on a lot of the expertise and wisdom of some of the frontline community leaders that we spoke to directly. So I'll read a couple of these quotes. Again, B-Labs talked to almost 20 individuals over the course of about a year and a half, and Forum for the Future led several workshops and interviews with another set of folks as well. And I really think that bringing in these perspectives and hearing firsthand from folks doing this work on the ground has been really critical for B Corps to understand what they need to do in terms of shifting their own awareness and perspectives on climate justice. So this is from Brett Isaac, CEO of Navajo Power. He says, climate justice is not just about transition. It's about taking care of the communities that are being abandoned with the shift away from fossil fuels. And Deandra at Intersectional Environmentalist says, from an intersectional environmentalist perspective, the aim should be to make engagement accessible and culturally relevant to promote equal access to meaningful participation. Environmental justice is marked by the inclusion of communities in decision-making around their own environments. Intersectional environmentalism is a lens that helps us identify and uncover opportunities for building agency around missing participation to achieve a future where we all have equal access to contributing to climate justice. I think this was really the kind of basis of the aims of our work here, was to ensure that we have representation, that we have a lot of diverse voices from across the movement present in this guide to help steward business action on climate justice. And the next slide, please, Christina. So visions for a just future, we also in these conversations asked folks to tell us what they hoped for a just future. It's really easy, I think, to focus on the problems and to not also open us up to the possibility of hope and really visioning what a just future would look like. So you can see here some of what we heard. A just future is cooperative and connected, safe and healthy, joyful, thriving, accessible, democratized, and decentralized. And on the next slide, we have a few more. A Just Future is taking responsibility, accountability to community needs, not seeking credit, sharing profit and ensuring co-benefits, supporting and stepping aside. So these are really the key pieces that we heard from communities around what's needed from businesses. How do we change the status quo and how we've partnered with communities in the past? So to that point, the next section that we dig into, this is really what we call the meat of the guide. We were really excited to have this be kind of the core of the guide. We spent a lot of time thinking about how to present this section and how to have this unfold. And in the partnering with communities section, we dig into two key areas. The first one is a set of principles for partnership with frontline communities that B-Lab US and Canada has developed, which I'll speak to. And the second is actual guidance and practice developed by Forum for the Future. So really operationalizing the principles, digging into the how and the actual concrete steps businesses can take. And if you go to the next slide, Christina. So I'll speak to the principles for partnership with frontline communities briefly. This is a process that we engaged in over about a year with a group of frontline community leaders and B Corp climate representatives to really co-create and think together what this would look like to guide B Corps and all businesses, any interested business, along a path towards centering justice and partnering better, being in right relationship with communities. So you see here some of the folks that were involved in the process. It was very much so a process of deep collaboration, trust building, and really took a lot of focused time to build those relationships of trust within the group in order to develop the principles. So I'll run you through the 7 principles at a very high level. They are in the guide, and you'll be able to see them in the guide as well as in an article that we're publishing on B-Lab US and Canada's website today, which everyone will get. Number 1, center trust and transparent communications. Number 2, commit to equitable resource allocation. And the next slide, they continue. Number 3, commit to, equitable resource allocation. I'll step back here. Oh, yeah. So number 2 is centering local wisdom and perspective. And number 3 is commitment to equitable resource allocation. Number 4, prioritizing racial and cultural literacy. 5, centering conflict acknowledgement and trust regeneration. And 6, co-developing clear and equitable decision-making processes. And last but not least is 7, which is centering long-term and sustainable commitment to ensure our collective survival. So as you dig into the principles, you'll see each of them built out and really thinking through what this means, again, for businesses to think about new ways of approaching partnerships and really taking a step back to really step into a listening mode first and foremost, centering that first principle. So the last section I'll cover before I hand it off to my colleague Charlotte to run through one more critical piece of this section, the mindset shift, is partnering in practice. So again, Forum did some really incredible work to develop some of these kind of concrete steps that businesses can take to actually partner better with communities. So in this section in the guide, you'll see preparing well, building trust, program co-design, program implementation, and then program transition or continuity. What do we do when a program wraps up in order to ensure that all parties involved and both the community group as well as the company are both able to see that success continue or have very clear roles around where the program sits. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Charlotte Sewell, my colleague who's been supporting our climate work for a few years now, to speak to the mindset shift.
Hey everyone, yeah, this is one of my favorite sections of the guide. And this is hopefully a really helpful graphic for you to use and jump in and share and engage with. So just as we have those amazingly rich 7 principles for partnership that Kylie just gave you a brief insight into, we also have this visualization, which is just a helpful tool that we've used with hundreds of businesses who are looking to identify the behaviors that might be on the left-hand side of this chart, more extractive and exploitative. These can be some of the behaviors that are part of traditional ways of doing capitalism that can really get in the way of a climate justice approach. And then on the right-hand side, you can see behaviors that businesses can demonstrate that are more equitable and regenerative. And when I think of those awesome 7 principles for partnership, a lot of them really belong on this right-hand side of the wheel, where businesses are moving to being focused on learning and making progress, to being open to things happening in a non-linear way, to making space for uncertainty, for deep listening and collaboration, for lots of diverse intersectional decision-making, and for being consciously anti-racist, for making space for things to be multidimensional, to take a little bit longer, to go slowly, and to be broader. Sometimes we see kind of myopic, one-size-fits-all behaviors on the left-hand side that businesses can get into. So this graphic is a really an invitation to notice, oh, where are we doing some of the behaviors on the left-hand side, and how can we move into that right-hand side of the wheel and really occupy some of those climate justice behaviors that make space for those principles for partnership to really shine. So that's a tool that is in the business guide for you to explore and engage with. All right, I think next slide, Christina. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte and Kylie. And so you're passing it back on to me. So I'm going to go through the section that we're calling Guidance for Business. And this is where we focus. And Christina, next slide, please. Where we recognize that every business has a range of spheres of action and influence. And this is a tool that we use quite frequently at Forum. And if you've been part of some of our other collaborations, you might have already seen this tool where we really unpack where businesses can take action within internal operations, including policies and finance, as well as products and services, value chains, and then thinking about the wider enabling environment where business might not have direct control, but there is ability to influence. And so we unpack policy advocacy through this work as well. And I'll just go back. I was going to read the quote from Jacqueline. It's a powerful quote that, again, illustrates the need for businesses to really take action. There needs to be a deep shared understanding of what the root causes of the problems are, and a recognition that you're showing up with a commitment to transform those systems that have resulted in interlocking oppressions for so many people. Even if you come from a different place in the ecosystem of social change, you want to leverage the resources that you have in the private sector to be able to do that transformational work. This is a really important place to start. And this is from Jacqueline Lee Tam, who is the Executive Director of Climate Justice Organizing Hub in Canada. And this quote is so powerful, and we've heard this across that, again, that businesses are able to leverage the resources, the reach, the scale that you already have to really help to accelerate the shift and really advance climate justice. So let's go, and I'll quickly go through some of the areas that we've identified. So in internal engagement, we heard over and over that getting buy-in from senior leadership team to make this core to business is a critical unlock. We also heard about the importance of employee engagement in this work. So the guidance that we publish goes through in details of some of the key areas that you can take action for employee engagement. So for instance, really creating a space to listen to employees across different affinity groups, fostering a foundational understanding of climate justice. What does that mean? What does that look like? Formally involving employees with local knowledge in shaping engagement and sustainability programs. We also go into practices and cultural shifts needed to engage with senior leadership team and advice for senior leadership team around aligning vision and mission with climate justice principles, really suggesting for integrating climate justice into business decisions, and identifying the right individuals within your organization to lead that relationship building. What we find quite often is that you'll have folks working on around sustainability, and maybe there's some within the business working on engagement, but sometimes they're not talking, or that's not as the action is not integrated. So there's an important work there to take action on that. I'll go into the next one, which is internal operations. And so we provide advice on thinking through about elements that are owned and controlled by your company, such as buildings, corporate headquarters, factories. And really here, what we hear, some of the big community concerns is that people are feeling that they're not listened to or factored into business operation decisions when it comes to things like permitting or continued operations. And it's having cumulative impacts on communities. So some of the advice that we go through here is really understanding concerns that are arising from communities, really listening, considering consider outcomes that are beyond decarbonization, including health outcomes, restoring biodiversity, and really involving community members in deciding how investment decisions will directly impact and benefit the communities. So in products and services, this is where we examine a mainstream system of material extraction, production, consumption, waste disposal. And we look at what does it mean to take a justice-led perspective around products and services. So some of the suggestions and advice that we go through is re-examining current research and development processes, identifying opportunities for working directly with communities who are being impacted, leveraging comms and marketing platform for awareness raising. We also talk about accessibility and resilience, especially during extreme events, and then new business models to address wealth inequity. I just want to add that for each one of these sections we go through, you will see in the report, you'll see a description of what it is. Then we go into guidance for each section. Then we'll have case studies and then questions that you can start asking yourself as you read through the section. In the value chains, we explore recurring issues of power dynamics with different stakeholders and how often that leads to disproportionate control over decisions and unfair treatment. We explore traceability and transparency in the value chain, the need for financing for supplier transition to climate positive practices, and developing strategic partnerships. And then lastly, in the policy advocacy, so we find that this area has immense potential for a system shift and is potentially one of the most daunting areas. So here we provide guidance on where and how you can start, including joining existing coalition at your local, state, national levels, engaging elected officials, aligning your advocacy efforts with priorities set by communities to create leverage needed. And that's so critical. Sometimes we find that companies will go out to do policy advocacy without engaging communities to fully understand the depth of impact of different policies. So we bring it together to really show how partnering with communities to do policy advocacy is critical. And this is key highlights. This is a summary of the report, and actually you can find this in the first few pages. And I know we still have a panel, so I'm not going to go into this, just to show that really this is about prioritizing trust building with frontline communities. There's a need to adopt a new mindset. There's a need for offer immediate and sustained support to meet frontline community needs, which could be financing, but it could also be resources, skills, policy advocacy, and then to start to consider your spheres of control and influence and where you might be able to take action. So I'm going to pass it over to Christina, my colleague and one of the authors for the report. And Christina will facilitate our wonderful panel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ksenia. And hello, everyone. I'm Christina, part of the Forum for the Future team and one of the team members who worked on this guide. And I have the honor of introducing our wonderful panel, two amazing leaders in the field who have advised us on this guide from the start and contributed again and again, answering our questions and giving us wisdom. So we have with us today Elizabeth Joseph from the New Rochelle Public Library and Penny Opal-Plant from Movement Rights. So I also, just before we dive in, want to go ahead and encourage you all to ask some questions in the chat. We'll have a few minutes at the end for Elizabeth, Penny, Ksenia, and Kylie to answer. But to move us along, I'm wondering if to start, Elizabeth and Penny, if you would introduce yourself briefly, describe your work, and share how your work is advancing climate justice.
Right. So thank you, Christina, and thank you, Forum for the Future, for this opportunity. It's a real sort of career highlight for me, and I think to have a voice in this guide has been incredible. So I'm an assistant director at a public library in New Rochelle, which is the 7th largest city in the state of New York. We have, our population size is about 80,000, and it's a very diverse community, both racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically. So about 2 years when I joined this organization, it was a very hot and humid summer. It was also, there was a storm at that time that took out power for several days. And I was thinking about how can we be there for the community? How can we best serve them, right? So after researching it a little bit, I found that we could be a climate resilience hub. And so as a climate resilience hub, what we do is we provide temporary shelter. Doesn't mean, it means that we are open extended hours on the weekends. And we're also a clearinghouse for information and resources. So we provide information to generate awareness of climate crisis. We help them prepare in the event of a climate disaster. And then lastly, when calamities strike, we have staff who will help with filing claims and assistance with that. So it's really all of the work having to do before climate disaster strike and after.
Amazing. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's great to have you with us today. And Penny? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be with all of you on Earth Day. It's been a pleasure to be part of the team developing the Business Guide to Advancing Climate Justice. I'm an enrolled member of the Yaquis of Southern California and undocumented Choctaw and Cherokee. I'm a mother and a grandmother who's worked on defending and protecting the sacred system of life for over 40 years. I grew up in the shadow of the Chevron refinery in Richmond, California. And I'm a successful small business owner who utilized my brick and mortar stores to inspire, educate, and raise funds for water, land, climate, and indigenous issues. I co-founded Movement Rights, which works with tribes and communities to advance the recognition of rights for bodies of water and land. And I also co-founded Idle No More SF Bay, a grassroots frontline group of Indigenous people and our allies working on climate justice in the San Francisco Bay Area, where there are 5 oil refineries. A lot of people don't know that. And I created the Society of Fearless Grandmothers, which trains grandmother-age women to blockade streets at climate justice actions to keep the younger ones safe behind us. A long history of doing frontline community climate justice and Indigenous rights work. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Penny and Elizabeth. It's wonderful to have you. And again, thank you just for all of your input into the guide up until now. So to start, Penny, we'll start with you if you don't mind. Our first question today is, what would you all like businesses to know about climate justice, and why is it necessary to take action?
Yeah, thank you. You know, we share one earth, one air, one atmosphere, and one water. And fossil fuels are the main cause of climate disruption, and fossil fuel extraction, pipelines, refineries, and plastic manufacturing are all in and around communities of Black, Brown, Indigenous people, and the working poor. Now, obviously, the accumulation of these greenhouse gases and toxins are impacting people outside of these communities, including all of you and your businesses. And unfortunately, world decision makers, especially in the rich countries, are still not on board with what is necessary and vital to rein in fossil fuels. And, you know, the fossil fuel industry is so powerful that it has captured regulatory agencies, it's funded elected officials' campaigns. And according to an article in The Guardian yesterday, they've contributed millions of dollars to universities to influence research in climate and so-called solutions that I consider to be false to climate disruption. Yet, you know, imagine if we'd always subscribed to the way of thinking of Indigenous peoples who traditionally make decisions, taking into consideration the health, safety, and well-being of descendants 7 generations into the future. Just like take a second to imagine a world where that happened across the board. Or a world where if everyone always adhered to the precautionary principles of doing no harm and examining decisions to ensure that they wouldn't cause harm. So it's apparent to me that while there are many good people working on all aspects of ensuring a safe, sustainable future, no one is going to save us from climate devastation except ourselves. And it's up to us in our communities to work with others to stop the harms and imagine how we want our communities to be moving forward. I often, excuse me, encourage people to think about like what kind of appropriate housing in your community will there be for whatever climate disruption is happening? Where is your clean water going to come from? How should we be educating our children for what's coming? And like working on that and thinking about it. And just, working with frontline communities who are experts and with valuable knowledge of the harms and with strategies on how to remediate the harms is vitally important. And it must be done in a thoughtful and good way. As a grassroots frontline community justice organizer, I know how important it is to have trust between organizations and businesses in communities. Many of us have had unpleasant experiences with outside groups and businesses who come in with their own set of expectations and ideas on how to make our communities better without talking to us. And unfortunately, a very recent example of this was just this past week when an organization that does really good work on housing and climate legislation organized an Earth Day Film Festival. Unfortunately, it was sponsored by Wells Fargo, which has invested billions of dollars in financing fossil fuel projects, including the Dakota Access Pipeline, which I'm sure you all remember Standing Rock, right? Wells Fargo funded that pipeline, among others. When the grandmothers and founders of Idle No More SF Bay found this out, we wrote an email to the organization explaining why this is inappropriate, and we CC'd the frontline groups who were participating and others in the area. The organization had no idea of the harms that Wells Fargo had caused and is causing, and the frontline groups, which had films being shown there, backed out. So this is just an example of how important it is to speak with frontline community groups before planning really well-intentioned events. Otherwise, you may be contacted by groups of grandmothers who won't put up with it if you've stepped out of line or not done your research and who you're partnering with. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Penny. And thank you for elevating the Wells Fargo example. There is a section actually in the guide on climate finance. So if that's something that you all in the audience are interested in, feel free to dive in. So we'll pass it over to Elizabeth.
So recently I was at a climate conference, and one of the sponsors was Con Edison, and I had a good laugh about that. And at this conference, I met several people and I learned that several wealthy residential communities who are concerned about the climate crisis and just don't know what to do. What they do is they hire energy auditors that will sort of be consultants on how to reduce their carbon footprint. And I thought, wow. And I was sort of just stunned because Black and Brown communities who primarily reside in urban environments have no such luxury, right? Decisions are made for them. They are kept out of conversations. They are kept in the dark till they see things happen around them. And the decisions that are made generally impact their health gravely. The city where I work has dealt with extreme weather, temperatures, and climate disasters, with many of our residents not having adequate housing, nor the sufficient resources to remediate their housing situation. It's segregated across socioeconomic lines, which means that certain parts of our city, there's EV charging stations and green spaces, and other areas through exposure from overdevelopment, our children and elderly suffer from respiratory illness. because I live and work in an urban environment, what I have seen is that lifespans are being shortened, end of life is tortured because people are dealing with things like asthma. And the hospital rates for children are just are sky high. You know, we can be oblivious and continue to deny the severity of climate change and downplay the role of racial inequity, but we just can't run away from the fact that it's seeping into our lives, right? We see a lot of people displaced and having to live on the street. There's just it's just a system that doesn't work for everybody, and we can no longer just pay lip service or have our actions be performative. We really just can't have businesses come into our community, get rich off of us, and then the community pays the price for all of their capitalist decisions and actions.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing, Elizabeth. And so moving on to the next and unfortunately final question for today. But since you both were with us in the whole process of this guide, and you've had a chance to take a look at it over the weekend, we're wondering, as you were reviewing the guide, what were some of your key takeaways that you think are essential for our audience to know today? And Elizabeth, I think we'll bounce it right back onto you if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not at all. I really thought that all of the organizations that were highlighted and who were doing wonderful work, to see them spotlit was just great to see, because climate activists are not like big corporations, right? They're not the Nature Conservancy. They're regular people like you and our neighbors and our friends. And I think that everybody can play a role in climate activism. I really appreciated the guiding questions, which really were helpful in terms of reflection. I also want to add that adaptation is one approach to climate work, but resilience and true resilience can only happen through sustained mitigation, right? Because we really have to look at what is happening and then continue to reduce the effects of that, so that the future is no longer about adapting to all of the crises. I think this work requires a deep commitment, and sometimes there are failures, and sometimes you need to take a step back, but ultimately the hard work, just the intention and the effort that you put into it is I mean, it has to be now. It has to be because I think the evolution of our humanity on this planet is threatened, and we can no longer just stand by and watch it happen. And otherwise, there won't be any next 7 generations to enjoy what we have now.
Has to be now, exactly. And Penny, how about you round us out for this wonderful panel that we've had today?
Yes. So, we're living in a powerful time with people who ignored climate change being an issue. But today, there's so many people ready to do something about it due to, their own personal experiences or experiences of their family and friends, because of the heat, the floods, the droughts, the fires, and so on. And the Business Guide to Advancing Climate Justice is an inspiring tool to bring people together to stop the harms and imagine their visions of a climate-safe community together, where no one is left behind. And, doing this work might make you and people that you work with uncomfortable. It might even make you nervous or frightened of people who are very different from you, who talk differently, who look differently, who have different ideas. But, really, this is the beauty of climate justice. We get to learn how to be with people who are different from ourselves. We get to find value in people who may not have been valued before, on both sides. We get to enhance our communities by building trust and good relationships, by moving through the challenges and the hard parts. And in doing this work, we realize that this not only benefits our communities, but it also benefits ourselves. You know, as a business person, I think I can speak to this. Business people are used to making quick decisions and acting on them. I appreciate that this guide is not a false quick fix. Just like climate disruption took decades to grow into the massive issue that it is today, the potential solutions that will grow from working with frontline communities will take time. And I encourage all of you to internally expand yourselves to appreciate the journey of developing these relationships. I know that this is what every person in frontline communities had to do to work on making their communities safer and healthier. It's difficult. It's difficult. It's challenging to open yourself up in that way and take that step forward. But I can tell you that each person had to rise out from their comfort zone, and they did. And so can all of you. And I want to just end this bit with telling you about a lovely piece of writing attributed to a Hopi person about this time that we're living in. It was released in June of 2000, and we have tried to find who the person is, but we don't know, and so we're not sure it's even attributed to a real Hopi person. But I want to share just the ending of it with you. This is a good time. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they're being torn apart and will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above water. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. The end.
Amazing. Penny, as always, you've left me with goosebumps. But thank you so very much, Penny and Elizabeth, for joining us and for your wisdom throughout this whole time. And not to swiftly move us from that inspiration, but unfortunately, we have about 9 minutes left. So I'm going to bring Kylie and Ksenia back up here. And if you would like to ask any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Or actually, you know what? I'm going to unspotlight us and so that we can see everyone who's here today. But feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you. We probably have time for about 2, or drop them in the chat. And if there's not time for all your questions, we can follow up with them over email with all the material that we'll be sharing after the fact.
As we're waiting for questions, yeah, I just want to say thank you to both Elizabeth and Penny for participating on this panel and for joining us on this journey. Your voices have been so critical, and thank you for sharing your experiences. And I will be holding a lot of what you're saying, Penny, in my mind, that the time of the lone wolf is over and we're the ones that we've been waiting for. So true.
Thank you for sharing it in the chat, Charlotte.
Ksenia, can I share a question that someone direct messaged me?
Yeah, absolutely.
They just said, if I'm a business who's never done anything on climate justice before, where should I begin?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually have that in the guide, where to begin. The first place is to listen and learn. That is the first place, because we come into this work with different preconceptions of what this work is. And I know for myself, as I began this journey 2-3 years ago with Forum for the Future, just listening to what others were saying, learning, hearing from different communities, learning of the work that's already out there has been really critical first place to start. I'd like to invite others to share if there's anything else that you want to add. Penny?
I think a really good place to start is by finding out who's doing climate justice work in your communities and just going to a meeting or going to an event or an action that they're doing and just observe, what's happening. Who are these folks? How can my business begin to help them? And just really being patient and respectful and just start showing up. I mean, that's always the first step. And oftentimes it's the hardest step, is just to show up.
All right, well, feel free to email us with any questions you have as you're going through the guide. Charlotte, Natasha, I know you were monitoring the chat. Just want to confirm that we're not missing anything else. No? Okay, well, okay, great. Well, we're here and we'd be happy to talk with you more. If that's all for now, I'll reshare the screen and Ksenia can take us on with our call to actions. And just again, thank you, Elizabeth, thank you, Penny, for sharing, and thank you all for joining us for this past hour.
Yeah, we have some thoughts of how you can get involved and what our next steps are. So obviously download the guide and please share. We really want, part of our goal is to get this out to as many businesses and people as possible to start taking action. Send us feedback on the guide if you are working through any of the steps yourself, or if you see different areas that haven't been reported on or touched on, please send us feedback. You can email myself directly or Kylie, and our emails are provided. Sign up for our newsletters because we have ongoing work in the space, upcoming events and programs. And I'm seeing that Christina just shared the emails and where you can sign up for the newsletters. So Forum for the Future is going to be doing some place-based work in Chester and Philadelphia area in Pennsylvania. So if you are in the space, if you have a business, if you're operating on the space, please reach out to us because we are looking for collaborators, and we'll be testing some of the insights from the guidance as we go through and start developing relationships with communities and partnerships and taking action. If you are interested in us presenting the findings or doing a similar presentation that we just did for Lunch and Learn for your team, maybe you're just starting your journey, we're happy to do that. We can set up a Lunch and Learn or do a presentation or even think through how to apply some of the findings to your company. And then finally, support environmental and climate justice organizations. So if you go to the next slide, we have a list of different organizations that you can start supporting, learning from, working with. This is in our report as well. It's page 30 in the report, and you can actually, all of these links you can click on and you get to the websites. And we have talked and worked with a lot of these organizations, and it's really critical to be supporting them in multiple different ways. And I think this is it. Kylie, did you want to add anything from your perspective?
I will just add one piece, so more of an administrative piece for everyone in this call who was able to join us. During the event, we did discover a couple sections of the guide that actually need to be updated. In full transparency, this has been a really long process, and so we want to make sure we get it right. So after this, we'll be re-uploading the final version with everything in the correct order. And so what everyone on this call will get is an email prompting you to download the guide when it's ready with the final updated version. So thank you for your patience. And just keep in mind, if you downloaded it already, definitely encourage you to download the link that you'll get from us. And then I just want to say thank you so much. I just have the deepest gratitude for Ksenia, Christina, Natasha, and the forum team, for Charlotte, who has been an incredible thought partner, and most of all for Penny and for Elizabeth in joining us in this work and providing your deep insight and wisdom. It has been a journey, and that's exactly what it is. And I am really grateful to you all for being here and really showing up in the spirit of collective action around this work. You know, we know that the need is dire, and as Penny said, it takes everyone.
Thank you everyone for joining. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you, and happy Earth Day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the beautiful sunshine wherever you are.